All right, away we go. So this is your second lecture series, summer lecture series. In the first one, what we did was more origins of government. I know the titles kind of seem to overlap, but what we were looking at more so with government, origins of government in our first lecture series, was the idea of why did governments emerge in the first place, and what's kind of the purpose that they serve. We were getting your terminology down, getting you to be able to distinguish between various forms of government. Now we begin to transition. This is not a comparative course. This is looking at American government, obviously, kind of uniquely. So we're going to begin, having given you the overview, to begin to narrow the lens a little bit and look more specifically at American government. But that starts with some foundational things as well. What we want to look at is the historic factors that have led to the unique form of government that we have. And you can see why I do this during the summer, because a lot of this is, again, I called it foundational stuff. It's stuff that you arguably should already know. But if I don't go over it, chances are, you know, you've got a fingernail's grasp on it. It will come back to you as I say it, but if I were to put you on the spot via a test, without having gone over it, you wouldn't do as well, right? So a lot of this is just about bringing back, hopefully, what's familiar, crystallizing it, putting it in a kind of a scope and a sequence that makes sense, all right? So just to give you kind of an overview, what we're going to look at is both kind of global and then colonial factors that had led to the formation of the framers' belief system. We're looking at those factors that really shaped how the framers thought. Again, if you look at what I've got highlighted, we're looking at both kind of the bigger global historic ones, but the colonial events as well. Oftentimes, if you start the government course, you just kind of pick up with the Constitution, but what you've lost is the context in which the Constitution is written. Hold on. See what kind of glitch that is. So what you want to, again, look at is not just starting with the Constitution, but the context that influenced the framers when they wrote the Constitution. I'm using an analogy here. You don't want to just look at an engine. You want to kind of talk to the engineers who designed that engine, because the engine doesn't tell you everything. There's intent when they design things. There's a logic to when they design things. And we're kind of unique in the United States. We have a reverence. We idolize the framers, almost to like comical degree. You know, when you think about modern issues, stem cell research, which is kind of controversial because you're using embryonic material. And we look at this very kind of complex legal, moral, scientific issue. We go, I wonder what George Washington would think about stem cell research. We kind of ponder what his mind would explode if he had to wrestle with that issue. We look at like Market Basket and RDT versus RDS, the great Market Basket strike of 2014. What would Jefferson say about the strike and the current kind of situation at that supermarket? We have this idea that they had it right. Some of it, I kind of suggested this the last time, is because I think they had this incredibly unique moment where, the American Revolution was like unlike anything else in history. And the success that followed is unlike anything else in history. And it may be because we did have a group of elites who keyed upon the Enlightenment and the Enlightenment ideals and bought into it in a country that was small enough and, maybe homogeneous enough that they were able to kind of do this kind of radical experiment. It's a moment in time. And so again, like I said, I think some of the reverence is well placed. At any rate, what the framers did, and what you guys are going to kind of get down, to the point where you're going to be able to spit these definitions back out me verbatim, is they created a system that built in and guaranteed certain cornerstones. All right, so there's your first term that we got to begin to think about. Cornerstones. Think of it in an architectural sense, and let's keep it simple. What is a cornerstone? From an architectural standpoint, we're talking about a building. What's a cornerstone? Don't overthink it. There you go, Nick.
Corner, stone, on the bottom, on like the platform on the...
There you go. So just it's the stones that go into the corners of buildings, right? Easy. Hence the name, cornerstones. What's the, what makes them so critical? What do they do? They're the foundation. In other words, they do what for the building? They support it. Take them away and what happens to the building? It collapses. They hold up the building, right? If you took away the walls and you left the corners, the building would remain standing, correct? If you took away the cornerstones and left the walls, the building would collapse, right? So these are incredibly kind of critical stones that hold up the building. Now, translated into a governmental sense. So instead of physical stone blocks, what we have are fundamental principles. Historically developed fundamental principles. And I back up intentionally. Every single one of those words is loaded and important, right? Historically developed. If something was just kind of unique to a particular point in time, you could qualify it. You could say that it was unique to that particular period of time. Something that's historically developed seems to have more value, more validity. And we attach a greater sense of importance and value to it. You know, it's been won and maintained over time. I want you to think about if your family has anything that's been handed down generation to generation. Your name alone. You know, you may think about preserving your name, your last name. That's something that's been passed down generation to generation. There may be, I don't know, a family business that has all kinds of value to it. There may be kind of family heirlooms and artifacts. You know, something that has been sustained, preserved, and developed over time has more value, more weight. It's more important to us. What are they again? They're fundamental principles. That word fundamental is incredibly important. What we've said is if we kind of boil it down to the smallest element, this is what we have. Okay? So at its most basic level, these principles, these ideas, these beliefs are at our core. Right? So they're historically developed fundamental principles on which government is based. These are the critical linchpins that you can't do without. All right? Now again, what you're going to have to develop in both this unit and next is the ability to do these terms verbatim, word for word. Because again, each term that I've kind of bolded, highlighted, underlined in the notes is incredibly important. They're pivotal in terms of the definition. So if we start with example for rule of law, that's one of the guiding principles that makes our government function. It's what is critical to our system. So rule of law, what is it? And again, we've got to play around with synonyms and we've got to play around with words. You can never define the thing with the thing. You know, when we say cornerstones, you don't want to say they're corners that have stones. What I did is I flip-flopped it. I said there were stones in the corners. And that's enough to give it a new sense. So what are we talking with rule of law? Well, we're going to talk about written law, a written code of rules and regulations as enforced by a governmental authority. There, I've gotten kind of away from the word law. Okay? Written codes as enforced by government are the highest authority. That written is incredibly important. You guys have a handbook, right? There's a handbook. And on the first day of school, there will be a day of assemblies. And you'll have 7 periods of teachers going over rules with you and telling you kind of what to do. And by the end of that day, if you've got any sense, you'll hate this thing, right? But if I were to throw it away, there ought to be a kind of a chill that goes over the room, right? If I were to throw that away and I said that, you know what, we're going to just make Mr. Prescott, as assistant principal, the highest authority when it comes to school discipline. And within the classroom, I'm not going to worry about the handbook. I'm going to be the highest authority. I'm a reasonably, I brought you in here over the summer. I'm not that reasonable. But I am a fairly reasonable guy. I'm pretty easygoing. I seem nice. What's wrong with me being in charge? Why would you perhaps be uncomfortable? We're all getting along right now. You're all nice. Some of you are smiling. If I pivoted the camera. Others of you look somewhat catatonic. Put that word up. What's wrong with me being in charge? Why does it not make you feel secure? I'm being very nice to you today. How about tomorrow?
It's unpredictable, it's not written down.
Yeah.
It's not concrete.
It's unpredictable. I can, I don't sleep tonight. My kids spill paint in the house and it, goes everywhere. My car doesn't start. And I come in and I'm in a mood, right? And yesterday where I'm treating you nicely, today I'm not. And my standards change as a result. Hey, yesterday I said that you could get points for doing an outline. No, forget about that. That's not enough. It's not permanent. It varies day to day. It's not concrete, as you said. Written rule is there. It's black and white. Now, it's not that it's immutable. It's not that you can't change it. But typically when we're talking about written rules, we're talking about a constitution. That's a binding contract between two parties, and both parties have to agree to change it. That's written as part of the written rules. So if you change the written rule unilaterally, you are in violation of that written rule. Okay? That's an amazing guarantee. We may not like the rules, but we like at least the consistency of rules and the guarantee that that gives us. So, one other thing I wanted to say. Where did it go? I'm going to come back to it. I'll backtrack. I've forgotten something I want to say about it. Oh, I remember now. So, when I ask this to kids in like the 9th grade and I say, okay, in the U.S. government, who's the highest authority? What do you think people typically answer? What do my 9th graders answer? Who's the highest authority in our government?
President.
The president. They'll immediately go to that. And that's wrong, right? Because what's over the president? What's the right answer? The Constitution, right? The president cannot ignore the Constitution. They're bound by it. So the thing about the rule of law is not only does it give you certain kind of concrete guarantees and help govern your behavior, but it governs the government. It controls their behavior. Okay, skipping down to the next one, individual liberty. Again, certain key ideas in here that I bolded, I've underlined, and as you spit back a definition and a short answer, it would have to have these. So what we're talking about here is that certain fundamental rights, there's that word again. I'm getting down to the bare bones, the very essence, the most important. That's what kind of fundamental suggests, that I can't break it down any smaller. This is the most critical. And those particular rights are unalienable. So what do you hear in unalienable? Oftentimes AP government is about thinking about words you've seen 1,000 times and having a revelation. Understanding kind of what is meant by that word. Unalienable. What's in there? What's a smaller word? What do you hear, Kelly? Alien. So unalienable. What can't I do to it? What can I do to you? What does it mean to alienate? Go ahead.
To isolate something,
So if it's unalienable, I can't
take it away.
take it away. I can't isolate it. I can't extract that right from you. Think about it as like inherent. God-given, nature-given. You're born with it. But, I think the word inherent sometimes is a little more helpful. It's just part of your basic DNA. It's part of your code. You're born with it. It's I couldn't take away a right any more than I could ask you to not breathe your next breath. All right? What's interesting about this is, again, you don't want to just look at it in the academic sense. We're really trying to form up your own political ideology. we in this country have the idea that there are certain unalienable rights. Now, if we're saying they're unalienable, are we suggesting they're universal? Not just unique to the US experience. Malala, the girl from Afghanistan, you remember her? The one that asked, basically had a blog and was saying that women deserve education in Afghanistan. The Taliban shot her in the head. And she survived, and she's become a huge icon for women's rights and the right to education. And how about Nigeria? You remember the girls most recently that were kidnapped from a school? There was 300 of them, just rounded up in the night. And there was that whole campaign, Bring Back Our Girls. Do you remember that? You guys are sitting here in a classroom, again, albeit during the summer, but you take it for granted. You know, that education is something that will be afforded to you. And not only education will be afforded to you, but quality education that prepares you for the working world. Is that just because of where you live? Are you lucky? Did you hit the geographic lottery and the biological lottery to kind of be born who you are, where you are? Or does that right stop at the border? The right to education. The right to education for girls, uniquely. All right? So you have to kind of ponder that as a larger question. Do I really believe that these are unalienable and universal? And if so, how universal? And what's my list? You know, are people entitled to, the traditional, give me the 3 examples, the Holy Trio. What are they, Leo?
Life, liberty, property.
Is that it? You know, do we just kind of stop at life, liberty, property? Or is there a larger list? Is health care and affordable health care that is quality health care part of my list? Is high-speed internet, we joked about that the other day, is that part of an unalienable right? My God, if I took away the internet from you, could you function? You know, if the internet went away and you didn't have it, would you riot? You know, so what is your list? That's something we're going to begin to ponder. Popular sovereignty, I saw this as a kind of a weakness on the last test, in that the 2 parts of the phrase are really important. Sovereignty is the right to rule independently, free from a higher authority. In other words, you're the one in charge and you don't have to check with anybody above you. If I put the word popular in front of it, I mean the people are the source of that power. And they don't have to go to any higher authority to be in charge. All right? What's interesting in our system for both practical and pragmatic reasons, we transfer that power. That word transfer is hugely important. In a large country, it's not practical for the people to be in charge. It's too cumbersome. It's too time-consuming. Nor are we the best informed. And you want educated, trained professionals who have the time and the expertise to take over those issues. But don't mistake the idea that they're in charge because of their position and status. We have transferred that right to rule to these elected representatives. If we've transferred it, what does it suggest? What do we have the right to do? Take it back. It's our power. You're holding on to it temporarily till the next election cycle, or if you've done something inappropriate, there could be a recall, there could be a way to get rid of you. Bless you. Separation of powers. Again, come back to that axiom. Can you remember it today? Power corrupts. What is it, Liam?
Absolute power corrupts absolute.
Good. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's Lord Acton, who's a member of Parliament. The idea is power is an intoxicating kind of substance that invariably tempts people into abusing it. If you remember again, I started giving you scenarios where you were in charge of the classroom, the school, the town, the state, the United States. And with each kind of bump up, the grins got larger because of the idea of the power and what you could do with it, for both good and bad, right? So power is a frightening thing. We're kind of concerned that it leads to abuse. So what do? Well, we're going to divide it. Now, number one mistake people make. If I divide power, have I eliminated abuse? I'm saying that power is going to corrupt. So the more power you have, the more corrupting it's going to be. The bigger the damage you can do. So to fix that problem, I'm dividing power. Have I made corruption go away? No, because what's still in existence? You're not going to get rid of corruption until you get rid of this thing. What's the source of corruption?
Power.
Power. So does power still exist? Yeah. What have I done with the power? And therefore, what have I done with the abuse?
Split it.
Yeah, I've split it. I've done what?
Lessened it.
I've lessened it. All right? So don't make this mistake. When we talk about separating power, what we're doing is reducing the power by separating it, and therefore reducing the potential scale of abuse. It's a nitpicky thing, but sometimes people will use the wrong. They'll say they kind of, dividing power eliminates abuse, and it's wrong. You know, it wouldn't be as wrong outside an AP government class, but inside an AP government class, it's wrong. Okay? How do we do that? How do we divide our power? We do it a number of ways, right? How do we do it in the U.S. system? There's two ways. People usually get the first way, and then they don't think about the second way. Nick, how do we do it? Go ahead, Brian.
Local, state, and national.
Good. You actually got the way that a lot of people forget. We have a federal system. Remember, if someone came up to you on the street and asked you about what kind of system of government we have, you'd think first about who holds power, and then you think about where does power reside geographically. If I'm thinking about how we divide up power geographically between a central government and its subunits, we have a federal system. We have a national government, state governments, and local governments, and each of them has certain defined powers. You can kind of think about that as how we divide up powers vertically, because when you look at my hands, I'm kind of talking about it in a stack almost, the federal government at the top, state, and local. So that's how we divide powers vertically. We also divide powers horizontally. Within the federal government, what do I have? And on the state levels and even on the local levels. Jenny, what do I have? Three branches, right? Executive, legislative, judicial. What do I do even more with my legislative branch? What kind of legislature do I have? Bicameral. Good. Two houses. Okay? So we do this a lot of ways. But keep in mind, the thing that I have planted in your head is that separating is an imperfect solution. I'm only reducing the scale of abuse. Therefore, I have to bring in a contradictory yet complementary system. Get your head around that. Contradictory yet complementary. Because one axiom says you don't ever concentrate power. You're going to separate it. What I'm going to do, though, now is bring in a system of checks and balances where I am overlapping. That's the key kind of phrase within that term. I'm overlapping powers so that no one branch can act independently. And again, initially that seems kind of contradictory. Well, if I'm overlapping it and I'm making the two branches have to act together, that's like concentrating. But what it's doing is preventing any one branch from acting unilaterally. In order for them to exercise their reduced power, they have to go through another branch. And in doing so, you've developed a safeguard from them abusing that particular power. Give me a classic example. What's the legislative branch do? What is their role and function? This is, you have to leave my classroom. We can't answer this. Alex, what is it?
Make laws.
They make the laws. All right, give me a check. What's the logical check? The Congress makes a law.
Presidential veto.
The president can veto it. Now again, before we even get there, there's the idea that there's two houses, and what passes in one house has to pass in the other house in the same form. And if it doesn't pass in exactly the same form, it doesn't go on to the president. So already I've got kind of a check using the bicameral legislature. But once it's passed, it goes to the president's desk for either signature or rejection. There's also, we'll get to it later, like a pocket veto. There's a way to pass without signature. But the president's got essentially four options. The most obvious are sign it and veto it. All right, he vetoes it. Is that it? Anybody know what happens next? What's next? Go ahead.
Let's go to the house.
You can go to the House, back to the House. What did you call it, Alex?
Override.
An override. They can, before they just had to pass it with a majority. Now with a supermajority, a 2/3 majority, they can say, we're going to pass this over presidential objections. All right, done. Is it now a law? Any other body can weigh in? Who have we left out?
The judicial branch can decide if it's like constitutional.
Yeah,
or not.
they're gonna look at it and decide if it's constitutional. All right, the court weighs in and they decide it's unconstitutional. Done? Unconstitutional, you can't change that, right? I said it earlier.
And it would go back to legislative and necessary and proper.
Well, you could argue, you know, and this is what Congress does sometimes. I'm looking at it formally. Informally, they could pass another law and let you know, it's essentially the same law repackaged and let it go through the whole process again and let the Supreme Court rule on this 20 years later. And for the next 20 years, we'll have kind of re-implemented. So that is an option. They could kind of claim certain powers as to why they passed it. And what you're kind of hinting at is they went into the Constitution, here's your hint, and said, hey, look at this clause, this is why we should be able to do it. Supreme Court has ruled it unconstitutional, and written law is the highest authority. Why don't they amend it, right? They can amend the Constitution, all right? So here is a whole complex string of checks and balances to exercise one power. And ideally it prevents the abuse of that power because so many different parties have weighed in on it, all right? So that's what makes these not necessarily contradictory but complementary. Remember this, there's going to be a Federalist paper that you read later on in the year, and what I just said will kind of come back to you if you're understanding what I'm saying, all right? These two have to go hand in hand. Now collectively, everything together works to achieve limited government. And this is, you know, I won't say, you know, it's interesting. If I asked you to put these in a hierarchy, it would be interesting for you to kind of, you know, put them in an organized fashion. But they all do kind of come back and relate to, and perhaps it's what makes limited government the most important. It's the idea that government should have all of these safeguards to prevent abuse. That government, and this is probably perhaps the most important operative term, government should only do what we've empowered it to do. That's its stopgap. How far can it go? It can go up to and no further than the authority that we've ceded to it. All right? Anything else is too much. All right, so this is our list of cornerstones. This is what the framers have achieved. And this is why we have a reverence for them. Because they built this into our Constitution. They built this into our government. And as you guys did your reading test, that question about the missing appreciation of good, you know, we're all very quick to tell you what government has done wrong. But we often miss all of the securities, the guarantees that you guys have. And it has largely to do with those cornerstones, which again I said have been historically developed. And this is where I hope everything starts to click in for you. Every little chip I planted in your head in the 9th grade, everything that I kind of you know, tried to repeat and program you to kind of think about, you're going to begin to see that these cornerstones were in fact historically developed. And again, that historically developed is incredibly important because it suggests it's part of the natural evolutionary order of things. It's part of the natural order of things. It's the way things should be because we keep seeing it happen in a natural fashion. So go to Greece, go to Rome, right? In Greece, it's the first what? Athens, specifically. The first what? Greece versus Rome. It's the first direct democracy. So obviously that helped us achieve which cornerstone? What do you think, Jack?
Voting.
Yeah, which cornerstone?
Popular suffrage.
Yeah, right? Now, let me kind of help you understand this. What I mean is, the Greeks had it. That classical civilization that did all the, you know, the wonderful art and architecture and the Olympics and the Greek philosophers, they figured it out. They had a direct democracy. That becomes part of an historic birthright. They were the first to kind of reach that height of civilization. It now becomes something that everyone else is entitled to. If you had an older sibling, and they get a car at age 18, what do you get at age 18? A car. If they get a curfew and it's 12 o'clock, What's your curfew? 12, right? Once somebody has won something, I mean, they got it through what? Chance, happenstance, whatever. They wore your parents down, they got these things. They're yours. And God forbid your parents don't get you the car and let you drive it till 12 o'clock at night. Right? Burn the whole place down. That's yours. You know, I do this joke with the kind of the ninth graders where I say, I'm going to let you guys at the beginning of class come in and have 5 minutes of chill out time. You can have a beverage of your choice, you can take a nap, you can listen to music, and then I talk about after 2 weeks trying to take that back. And watch people curl around their soda in the fetal position and scream, mine, as if it was like their firstborn child. Right? You can't, and I'm like, why can't I take the soda away? Well, because it's my right. And I'm like, what made it your right? Well, you let us do it for 2 weeks. Right? Try to take senior parking away. Is that a God-given, natural-given right? Did some sort of sovereign hand from the heavens reach down and give you that as a God-given right? Or did someone generations ago win that right because there were extra spaces? And they figured it's a moneymaker. I'm going to sell you a spot, right? Greece won this, and it becomes not only part of the natural evolution of things that we aspire to, but it becomes our God-given, natural-given right. And that's why I said more so it's inherent. All right, what about Rome? Greece is the first direct democracy. Rome, indirect, representative democracy, even more specific.
Republic.
A republic, right? What makes a republic a republic?
There's no blood ties.
Good. It's not by what it is, it's by what it isn't. In other words, not only can everyone vote based on basic voting requirement in an indirect democracy, but in a republic, anyone technically can run. You don't have blood ties. It's not like Parliament, where they have a House of Commons, House of Lords, right? Okay, so Rome is the first representative democracy, and it essentially establishes the cornerstone of don't overthink it. Representative democracy. Is it any other thing? Can it be any of the others? If I've got elected officials, do I probably have separation of powers and checks and balances? If it's any one of these, is it limited government? Right? So we're going to kind of begin to see it in a more sophisticated sense. Now, when I test you, you're going to have to pick an historic event and not only describe the event, but describe how the how that historic event led to the establishment of a cornerstone. And you cannot do Greece and Rome because they're way too easy. Right? That's an A to B. So we're going to kind of go through some of the ones that are perhaps, like I said, familiar to you that will come back, but will be a little more challenging. Let's go to like feudalism, all right? Rome fell because of marauding Germanic tribes. Lead bowls didn't help. Dysfunctional Julio-Claudian families didn't help. They put the horse in the Senate and burned down Rome and married, sisters and mothers. That dynasty didn't help. But really, Rome is following because of the marauding Germanic tribes, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Huns, the Vandals, right? And it's chaos in Europe. The solution is to get small. There are kings, but they're not big national kings. They are people that are trying to control a kingdom and a territory desperately because of all the invading tribes. So what do? They introduce the system of feudalism, right? Again, in the 9th grade, as I described it, I kind of did it this way. Let's say I'm the king and I'm in charge of the entire first floor here. And let's picture school is in session. And you guys are all buttoned down and you're taking notes, but God knows what's going on in the other parts of my kingdom. I better ride off and check on it, right? And I'm going to give you guys the instructions and continue to take notes and quiz each other. Come up with questions and answers and do it diligently. And I'm going to ride out that door and the door swings shut and academics continue unfettered, right? All right. I've left. I'm not here. And I have no guarantee that you're going to continue to guarantee me law, order, and stability. So I need to put a second command in place. Brian he's conveniently close, so I'm going to put him in charge. People that sit to my left here, they get picked as the example all year. So Brian is going to be in charge. he is going to be my what? This is under feudalism. He's my what? I heard it. Vassal, right? He's my vassal. The land that I give him is the fief. He took it from me. Fief. It's a goofy mnemonic, but it works, right? So he is the vassal. He is in charge of this particular fiefdom, and what we have is a pact. Feudalism is all built on oaths and kind of bonding, kind of oral agreements, right? Brian is going to do some things for me. In exchange, I've given him land. I've given him power. I've given him the right to rule this land in my name. And I am pledging to do him justice because essentially he's my second in command. And if you did harm to him, it's indirectly an attack on me. All right? So I'm going to make sure that as he looks out for me, I look out for him. In exchange, he's going to give me loyalty. He's going to give me military service when I need to go fight the Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths. He's going to help put together a force. He'll occasionally give me tribute. There's an economic component to it. Okay, so that's how we govern at this point. What cornerstones? What do you say?
Separation.
It's definitely separation of powers, right? The trick is you have to do because, right? And what would your because be?
Because you're giving power to Brian.
So, and I'm giving him specifically the land and the right to rule it. Now I've gotten concrete, right? What have I done with my own power as the king? I used to have a whole kingdom, right? What have I done with my own power?
Limited.
Yeah, I've limited. I've given a degree of it away. So as I'm talking about separation of powers, I've taken my power and I begin to divide it up amongst the vassals. And as I've reduced it, therefore, I've obviously achieved limited government. Is there any other that you might see in there? I kind of gave a list as to what I'm supposed to do and what you're supposed to do. Is that a precursor for anything up there?
Rule of law.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not written yet, is it? But there are kind of rules that we both have to kind of follow. And I've talked about doing...
For the white truck who's parked in front of the loading dock area, you must move. We're trying to get a delivery. Whoever's parked in front of the loading dock area, please move your white truck.
I've talked about, doing justice and you being loyal. Could that potentially be, again, a precursor for individual liberty? Right? We haven't formalized it yet, but there is this kind of expectation of what I'm entitled to. You want to talk about formalizing it, that comes along with the Magna Carta, all right? The Great Charter. You have to go back to, you remember Richard the Lionhearted off in the Crusades? A storybook kind of favorite, but a real king. As he's off, his less competent brother, John, is in charge. They nicknamed him John Softsword because he's terrible in battle. Loses all these battles, is constantly going for new taxes, and finally the nobles rebel. Why? Because that informal arrangement where both sides had certain expectations. I'm going to give you land and the right to rule it, and I expect certain limited things from you. That line had been crossed. But it was just an oath. It was just an agreement. And so to make it more of a guarantee, the nobles said, look, you can't function without us in the feudal society. You need us as much as we need you. So we want these guarantees more guaranteed. We want them as part of a written code. And that's what the Magna Carta is. It's really kind of a written, any constitution, people get this mixed up sometimes. A constitution really is a body of law that defines what government can and can't do. It sets up the scale, the scope of government. Okay, I've got 3 branches. This is how I elect elected officials. This is the length of term that they serve. This is what is a removable offense. This is the power that they have. But as I'm defining up the scale and scope of government, I'm also...
Can a custodian please call the main office? Custodian, please call the main office.
I'm also defining out particular rights. And what you want to look at under the Magna Carta is that really was what was the primary function here. Government was kind of simple at this point. So what a lot of the document did is they guaranteed certain rights of the nobility. Any step towards democracy is often a baby step. These aren't universal rights yet. They're just for the nobles. Okay? But what it did is it guaranteed the nobles protection against the arbitrary taking of life, liberty, and property. That should sound pretty familiar. It limited taxes. You know, had to keep them at a reasonable rate. It guaranteed a trial by jury. The king could not unilaterally kind of execute somebody.
So you're saying this is a form of constitution?
This is this is essentially, it wouldn't look as dry as our document, you know, in terms of its articles and sections, but this is a written charter. And a charter is kind of, in this case, loosely defining the role of the king, the rights of the nobility. It's guaranteeing certain religious freedoms. Now again, that list is important because as I'm looking at what it does, what cornerstones?
Can a custodian go to the loading dock to help with the delivery? Custodian, please go to the loading dock to help with delivery.
I think all those instructions are really going to enhance my video that people hopefully are watching 5 years from now. Okay, Magna Carta. What cornerstones? What obvious one? Rule of law, right? It's a written document that guarantees the rights of nobility and defines up the role of the king. It's written. Both sides have to honor and agree it. So if I'm doing this as my answer, I've got to explain. I've got to, not only do you have to kind of take the details of the event, you have to connect those details to elements of the definition. That's what makes this tricky. You have to do the because. It's rule of law because. And what you're doing is showing me the definition and how it fits against the details. Got it? Right? What else?
It's individual liberty, but only for the nobles.
Only for the nobles. Now, how would I prove it now? What is it, when you're saying individual liberty, I'm saying certain rights are fundamental. Like what right would be fundamental?
Like the life, liberty.
Now it's a real answer because first we're kind of talking in general. Now I've got a specific right. It makes the answer irrefutable. This particular right is guaranteed in writing. It guarantees individual liberty. Could it be others? Question. Could it be separation of powers? Could it be checks and balances? Could it be limited government? You can't get this one wrong. You can only poorly explain it and therefore lose the points. If you don't do the because, that's how you get it wrong. Right? Okay. What's next? And hopefully you're beginning to see this kind of progression. This, I know I'm weird, but I get excited when I start to kind of get into the role of this. And here's the next one, and here's the next one. And oh boy, here comes democracy. Just me. Okay. Parliament. What's Parliament equivalent to? What is it? What is our version of Parliament? Congress, right? It's a legislative body. It's England's version of Congress, right? This started off as an advisory body, all right? What ended up happening is from John on, this advisory body was, actually Henry III on, it's an advisory body that kings would go to say, is this a good decision? What do you think? What happens is, as we get to the Stuarts, there's an occasion where they go to Parliament 26 different times asking, is it a good idea to raise taxes? Now, if I ask you, all right, let's do it this way. Let's say you're talking to a friend and they're interested in dating somebody, and they ask you 26 times, what do you think of this person? Do you think this is a good person to date? Do you think it's a good match? Should I ask them out? They are not asking you for your advice. What are they asking you for? Your approval, your permission. They can't make the decision. They're asking you to make the decision. Do I like shorts? Should I wear shorts? If every day they call you before they come out the house, do I like, pants? What do I like? They're asking you not for advice, they're asking you for your approval, your permission, right? They go to Parliament 26 different times saying, should I raise taxes? And it's really, can I raise taxes? Parliament gets the power of the purse. And then you snicker, power of the purse. Again, we all have the image of, I don't know, who's the little old lady that has Tweety Bird, right? She's got a purse and it's full of hard candy. And it doesn't seem that kind of formidable until she whacks Sylvester with it. And the cartoon stars happen, right? The power of the purse is formidable because legislation is nothing but words on paper if it's not financially backed, okay? I can say I want educational reform and I want kids to get testing done to show that they've achieved, they've mastered certain kind of skills and gained certain knowledge. But until I fund that in terms of teacher training and administration and correction of the test, it's nothing. It's words on paper. So this is pretty formidable. And Parliament becomes an established body to make laws. Furthermore, Parliament begins to evolve into a lower house and an upper house, a House of Commons and a House of Lords. Easy peasy. Well, cornerstones. What do you say, Nick? Both of you.
Representative government,
How come?
because the people elect the lower house.
There. That's why bringing in the two houses was kind of important. You begin to see that one of these houses is directly representing the people because they get to elect them. House of Lords is representing the lords as well, isn't it? You know? So both kind of, stratas of society get represented here. The right to rule, in part, is being given to this body. So again, I got to take elements of the event and elements of the definition and put them together in my because, right? So this is perhaps an easy example of representative government. Can I do separation of powers? Easy, because I have what? Two houses, right? I've got a king in a house. I mean, a king in the legislative branch as well. Is it checks and balances? No longer advice. It's I got to go through in order for them to make law. It's limited government for this reason. Okay, we're continuing to evolve, and then we hit the English Civil War. You remember the Tudors, right? You remember Henry VIII and Mary and Elizabeth. Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, does not marry. It's part of a deliberate, conscious act. You'd probably not marry if your father had, 6 wives and murdered 2 of them. And you had all this kind of family dysfunction where your sister tries to murder you and put you in the Tower of London. She does not get married. There is no heir to the Tudor dynasty. Instead, it goes to the cousins. It goes to the Stuarts, who are less capable. Remember James Charles James? They can't even name themselves creatively, right? They just kind of repeat it. James Charles James. They're trying to rule as divine monarchs in an era that it's a bygone kind of, institution. Elizabeth is an absolute monarch, but only because of her skill. She's dealing with Parliament. Parliament is a legitimate body, but she's just good at manipulating Parliament, getting them to do what she wants and having them think it's their idea, right? In comes James Charles James, and they're trying to reassert the divine right of kings. And they're going to butt up against Parliament. It comes to a head with Charles, who wants to wage war in Scotland over religious differences. And he continually goes to Parliament for more money, and eventually they close up the purse strings. And we see the power of the purse. I can't wage war without the money. I'm, frustrated with this group. I'm going to disband them, Obama can't get immigration reform. He can't get health care reform. Fine, I'm going to fire Congress. Go home, Congress. You're no longer a body. What it devolves into is civil war. And it's when you think civil war, it's a war within a country. Usually you think of like between regions, north and south, right? Well, here it's between 2 branches of government. Between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And I picture them wielding, letter openers and 3-hole punches. And, but the king has a royal army, and they're pretty formidable. The parliamentary side is led by Oliver Cromwell, who has, a military background and military expertise, to the point where actually he defeats the royalists. They not only defeat the royalists, they take the king and they put the king on trial. King being the king says, I'm the king. I don't even recognize these proceedings. If I haven't authorized them, they're not legitimate. He doesn't testify in his own behalf. Trial goes very quickly. And they not only convict the king of treason for conspiring against Parliament, they execute him. the heavens don't open up. You know, plague and of frogs and locusts and all kinds of biblical wrath doesn't happen. When they execute the king, they execute the divine right of king theory, right? And what it does is it leaves Parliament as the sole body in charge. Parliament for a while is run as England for a while is run as a commonwealth. Commonwealth. A country where government runs things for the benefit of all. Why does that term sound familiar?
Massachusetts.
We're a commonwealth, right? Pennsylvania and I think Kentucky are as well. We're not really a state, right? Because a state would suggest that you're able to, conduct foreign policy and coin money and declare war. That you're, one of the things is they have a government that doesn't have to go to a higher authority to do things, right? So we're perhaps one of the 3 states that get it right. We were states when we were moving from 13 colonies to 13 states because we really were independent until we wrote the Constitution and came together. But our puritanical roots led us to be a commonwealth as well. Big tangent, but it's that commonwealth is kind of important because while Cromwell is in charge and Parliament is in charge and we're running it for the benefit of all, it's really an oligarchy of the Puritans. No dancing, no drinking, no playing cards, no showy dress. Cromwell tries to outlaw Christmas. Not Christmas itself, but like the celebration of it in a too frivolous of a sense. No wrapping paper and tinsel and decorating trees. Sit in a hard bench and think about Jesus. That's what you need to do for the day. No eggnog, nothing. Just hard bench. They hate him. When he dies, do you guys remember we talked about this? They dig him up, they exhume him, they hang him, they behead him, they put his head on a pike. All of this, just fun detail. But what it's kind of showing you is this seems like a botched experiment where, Parliament is, self-destructs. But I see it a little bit differently. Parliament is a legitimate enough body that people, both within Parliament and outside of Parliament, will fight, will risk life, liberty, sacred honor, to preserve and protect it. Okay? The English Civil War is one of the steps towards the dominance and sealing, let me rephrase that. It's one of the steps towards sealing the legitimacy of Parliament. It's one of the steps towards the actual kind of dominance of Parliament. You want to see the dominance of Parliament, you go to the Glorious Revolution, all right? James Charles, Charles James. After we executed, Charles, and Parliament turned out to be this kind of horrific experiment where it was being run by Puritans, they went back to the Stuarts. You can imagine the eggshells you walk on. You're going into a job that your father held, but he didn't do a good job and he was executed, but it's yours now. Enjoy. Don't worry about it. You'll do fine, right? James Charles II treads water. James II isn't so much making mistakes, he's got something wrong in his background. He's Catholic, right? England is a Protestant nation. That's what Henry VIII did. He, in order to get his divorce, to get his male heir, he converted England to Protestantism. And there had been all kinds of religious wars and turmoil ever since. That's why the 2 sisters feuded. Mary was raised Catholic. Elizabeth raised Protestant. That's what created tension between them. Parliament is fearful of resurrecting all that tension. They don't want to go back to tension between Catholics and Protestants. We can't have the potential king that comes in who is a Catholic and brings in a Catholic dynasty because he was actually married and had an offspring. All right? So what do? They depose him. Well, the last time in the English Civil War, in order for Parliament to kind of assert its authority and legitimacy, we had to have a civil war. We had to have actual fighting. Here, all they have to do is write a document. Before, it's a civil war that leads to the deposing of a king and the execution of a king. Here, it's a document and the stroke of a pen and the king is gone. All right? It's actually part of a kind of a bit of horse trading. What they do is they kick out James. They bring in William and Mary of Orange, who don't have a tanning kind of, addiction. They're from Orange of the Netherlands. And to make matters really awkward and uncomfortable, Mary is the daughter of James. William is the son-in-law. So again, we've murdered the father, we've brought in the son, and then we're going to fire him and bring in the daughter. Okay? And we're going to do it conditionally. We said that you can be in charge, but you have to sign the English Bill of Rights. Right? Again, a document. Different from the Magna Carta, which is a charter, which kind of, does some constitutional guarantees. This is a specific listing of rights, and they ought to seem very familiar. The right to petition the monarch. First Amendment, you have a right to petition. Protection against excessive bail, cruel and unusual punishment. What did we say that was at the beginning of class, Jenny? The 8th, right? The right to free speech and debate in Parliament only. What amendment? Right to free speech. First, good. In Parliament only. Again, you're not a democratic society if you don't, if you're, on the floor of Parliament and you're afraid someone's going to, arrest you for libels, for slander, for defaming somebody. You ought to have, we believe in free speech. We believe in it even more so when it comes to democratic debate, because otherwise it's not democratic debate. All right? But this does not extend to the street. The right to bear arms. What amendment? Second, 2 tickets to the gun show, right? Which way to the beach? Whatever mnemonic device you can come up with for that one. No taxation and execution of laws without Parliament's consent. It's not an amendment, but what does it remind you of? That I'll drive out of your head here in a second. What event does this become a rallying cry for? No taxation or representation without Parliament's consent. Take away the Parliament.
The revolution.
Yeah, the American Revolution, right? That became kind of our, hey, you violated our right to taxation without representation. The prohibition of the king from keeping a standing army. This really defanged the king. The king is now at the whim and at the mercy of Parliament. Now, again, cornerstones. It's a little trickier. But what it's doing is this is cementing the authority and legitimacy of Parliament, right? So it's definitely representative government. But as I get to the English Bill of Rights, it gets even easier, right? What obvious cornerstones there? I'm at the English Bill of Rights. Olivia, what is it? Which cornerstone from the English Bill of Rights?
I would say, for the last one here.
Yeah, for the English Bill of Rights, the document that we talked about, no taxation without representation.
Limited government.
Yeah, it's limited government. Government can't do certain things. Alex, what else is it?
Sorry, I missed that part.
So again, and that's on camera,
Yeah.
after asking it 3 times, the English Bill of Rights, what cornerstone?
Oh, alright, representative government, sort of.
Keep going.
Separation of powers,
Keep going.
limited government, I don't know about checks and balances,
Kelly's going to rescue you.
Rule of law.
Rule of law, it's a document, right? What else? What's in the document?
Individual.
Individual liberty. All right. This may be my cue that you need to come up for air, right? I've worn you down. Yeah, we'll take a break, although I'm almost at my... All right, so coming back from our little mini break, what, again, I'm trying to do is cascade things. I'm trying to take you through everything that we studied in world history and begin to have you have this aha moment where you see that this event wasn't just an event to study in isolation. This event had meaningful impact on the world today. It's one of the reasons why we can claim the right to certain things. These cornerstones that we went over at the beginning of the lecture. Those things that make your life better, that give you all of the luxuries and the guarantees that we kind of read about in the reading, come because we've got a government that's limited. The government is limited because of these evolutionary, kind of this chain of events that you're going to begin to see as almost part of an evolutionary process. Now, where we come to next is the Protestant Reformation. And again, maybe it gets a little cloudy, gets a little hazy here. How could the Protestant Reformation, a religious movement, have connections to political events? Well, again, if you run through what you remember about this event, the Catholic Church had a number of abuses that people were frustrated with. There's the sale of indulgences. There's the sale of church offices. There are priests that are cardinals and bishops that hold multiple positions in multiple towns and they collect the tithe. There's the fact that the church owns as much, if not more, land than some kings and has a bigger military force than some kings and has a bigger treasury than some kings. And then along comes Martin Luther, who kind of crystallizes all the frustration people are feeling by writing his 95 Theses. And he posts it on the door of Wittenberg Castle. And it's a dramatic event. Again, I joked about this with you guys as ninth graders. It doesn't seem that dramatic to take a list of complaints and put it on a door, but you have to think about what they had for entertainment back then. There is no Facebook, there is no Twitter, there is no, what's the photo one? Instagram. There's a church door. And what do you do on a Friday night? You go read the church door. Where he put the list is provocative. It's like putting your list of complaints about the school right on the superintendent's door, right? You're bringing it right into the lion's den. This is a major, major event where he's listing all these complaints. And it gives momentum to a growing movement where people are wanting church reform, okay? The term Protestant, you hear the word protest. They're protesting against the abuses of the Catholic Church, and they want reform. They want to change the church, really from within, okay? What they're looking for, and this is more particular to Luther and what will become the Lutheran faith, is a more personal and direct relationship with God. Why do I need the priests and their interpretation of the Bible and the rituals and the acts as a means to salvation? Luther suggests that salvation is possible through, and see if this term comes back to you, faith in divine grace alone. If I can kind of understand God, the workings of God, that, there is a wrathful God in the Old Testament, plague and pestilence and punishment, but there's the benevolent God, the one that provides people a pathway to heaven. And if I can key into God's plan and that pathway to heaven, that's like an invisible tractor beam that I step into, and up to heaven I go. So if I can have faith in divine, godly grace, the goodness of God, alone, that gets me to heaven. And I can get that through kind of independent meditation and readings of the Bible, especially since he put it in German, and that made it accessible to people. I can get there on my own. Well, there's a little insidious idea that's behind all of that. If salvation is no longer through the church hierarchy and its rituals and its authority, but it can be done by me, what is that suggesting about me? If I can independently achieve it, and you can independently achieve it, I'm Oprah now, and you can independently achieve it, right? What is it suggesting about all of us? We're all inherently, if we can all do it, we're all what? Equal, right? The Protestant Reformation kind of puts into our fabric, religion plays obviously an important role in developing people's kind of worldview, their outlook. In that fabric is this idea of basic equality, right? That's pretty powerful. Now, once you kind of create a religion, invariably they're going to argue over the nuances, and then you'll have all of these different kind of groups. And again, I got to be careful about this, how I say it. It's S-E-C-T-S, sects. And you got to hit the T, which I didn't do that well. So these different religious groups crop up, and Calvinism is the one that's perhaps most important here. Remember the Calvinists? We talked about them earlier because I was talking about Oliver Cromwell, who was a Puritan. But remember, a Puritan is a Calvinist. It's just a Calvinist by a different name. As Calvinists go to different places, they take on different names. This is a sect, I did it better that time, that basically believes in predestination. Kind of an interesting idea. Martin Luther suggested it was not external factors, it wasn't the church, it was internal factors, it was you. Calvinists reject both. It's not, you can go to church every Sunday, you can do all the rituals, the acts, the penance, all of that, not going to change things. You can do all kinds of internal meditation to be a good person, it's not going to change things. You are predestined to go to heaven or hell. God has fated your eventual kind of, rise to heaven or descent into hell. God has done it because God's all powerful. And God is, righteous in doing this, according to the Calvinists, because of original sin. The idea that Adam and Eve transgressed and therefore were thrown out of the Garden of Eden has damned us all. And God would be just in damning us all. But because God has the kind side, He's chosen to save a few people. Those are called the elect. Now, again, why is this significant? Well, it really becomes significant in the identification of the elect. How do we identify the elect? If you remember, Calvinists, meditated and they kind of, looked for a revelation. They looked for a sign that God had chosen them as one of the elect. And when they had that revelation, they recorded it in a journal. So the first thing you have to know is that all Calvinists had to be literate. All Calvinists. And that's a democratic ideal, to kind of, again, look to educate all people equally so they could have this revelation. Once they had the revelation, they shared it with the congregation. And the congregation voted them up or down. All right? That's a democratic ideal. That's, people have a source of power, and we've transferred that power to a congregation, and they have authority now to elect a person up or down. You can see other, Calvinist influence, but it's more like the New England, makeup. This Calvinist work ethic, this Protestant work ethic that still kind of exists here. Again, we joke, no playing cards, no showy dress, no profane language. They had all kinds of vices. And the common thread that the vices have is that, why are you having time for these things? How do you have time for dancing? That's an idle activity. You should be working. Plus you're swinging your hips, and that's provocative. Don't do that either. That leads to bad thoughts, and that means you can't focus on work either. Don't do that. Playing cards, that's idle kind of behavior. You should be working again. Now ask yourself, is there still a residue of that in New England? How many of you have attempted in your household to sleep past 10 o'clock? And how many of you have had parents look at you like, what is wrong with you that you're still in bed? And you feel shame. Maybe you don't feel shame. Maybe you're immune from that. But you come stumbling down the stairs at noon for a bowl of cereal, and your parents look at you and ask, you need to go to Aunt Jake's. Do I need to take you to the hospital because you slept for 14 hours? And then you would ask, well, what am I supposed to be doing in summer? And your parents would say something like, well, go dig a ditch. Because that's better than sleeping, right? Just moving dirt at random is better than you sitting slack-jawed looking at TV for 14 hours. Am I wrong? Is moving piles of dirt for no apparent reason better than watching 14 hours of TV? That's the Calvinist residue that's left over. It plays into our economic system more so, the capitalist system. Go to California, it's not like that, right? Go west, it's not like that. It's still kind of influencing us. At any rate, we can get to the Great Awakening too. I don't know how well you covered that in your U.S. too, but or U.S. 1. When you do the Great Awakening, the Protestant Reformation is all about this intellectual formalization of like, here's why my kind of religion makes sense. It's intellectual. The Great Awakening is more just about emotional connection. And you can see it in that they had these big revivals and people were overcome with the Spirit and they spoke in tongues and they went into kind of a religious frenzy. Behind this is the idea of finding the right priest or the right minister, these itinerant, these wandering ministers who could tap into that emotional connection. So you had this idea of you had a right to choose amongst your religious authorities, and you could remove them if you didn't want to. Bit of a maybe going above and beyond to bring in the Great Awakening, but all of this again, if I'm scrolling back, really what you're looking to do with each event in sequence is link it back to a cornerstone, to bring it back to one of these things that makes our government unique, makes our government as functional as it is, right? And so when I look at the Protestant Reformation, again, you're really finding a lot of examples of popular sovereignty, faith in divine grace alone. I get to be equal in a religious standpoint. I can find my pathway to salvation. I don't need the outside authority of anyone else. You see it but transferred when they begin to go to Calvinism and begin to identify the elect. All right? So, again, the two are intertwined. At any rate, it's that event that then leads us to the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment is hugely, this is really the event that had the most impact on the founders. Again, if we want to understand our government, you have to understand the mindset of the people who designed that government. You know, what was the most influential event for them? You know, if I'm looking at you guys and I want to understand, like if you guys got to write the government, you know, I don't know, is 9/11 still, and the worry of terrorism, is that still a really formative event for you guys? What is your, you know, most defining kind of events that have caused you to have the political attitudes that you have? For you guys, maybe arguably it's 9/11. For them, it's the Enlightenment, okay? What is the Enlightenment? Well, the Enlightenment follows the scientific revolution. You have to understand that these two things happen in sequence. In the scientific revolution, we are discovering that there are laws that govern nature. Laws. Hidden, immutable laws. That story about Newton under the tree getting hit by an apple and discovering gravity, as if it didn't exist prior to that. Everyone was kind of untethered and floating in space. And one day he discovers it, and thank God, now we can all kind of, you know, remain kind of, you know, in one position on the ground. It's an analogy. Gravity was there all along, and the apple was a way of describing gravity and what its impact was, of quantifying it, right? In the scientific revolution, we're discovering these hidden, immutable laws, things that had been there all this time. We just didn't have the ability to conceptualize them, describe them, quantify them. Well, by extension, if there's laws that govern nature, then perhaps there's laws that govern society. They're just similarly hidden. We can't see them. There are things that explain why an object drops on the Earth and yet remains suspended in outer space, how a planet can be suspended. Maybe similarly, there's a hidden math, a hidden science that explains everything in society, from how to best educate people. Maybe there's a hidden science that says, don't bring them in during the summer and try to go for a 4-hour lecture. That doesn't work. I don't believe that. It's the opposite. Bring them in the summer, and the longer you go, the more effective you are. That's the real law. Maybe there's laws about interpersonal relationships. Like, you know, there's a hidden science as to how to find the best mate. You know, who you would be most compatible with and have the most kind of fulfilling life with. Maybe there's a science to that, and we just can't see it. On and on it goes. You know, you'd extend it to government. You'd extend it to the economy. You'd extend it to every institution we have and say that there's rules that govern it. Why is the Enlightenment so important? Well, it takes all of those things that we talked about earlier, where feudalism brought about limited government and separation of powers, and Parliament brings about representative government, and the Protestant Reformation kind of brings about popular sovereignty, and it makes it part of the natural order of things. It takes what has happened that we're kind of aware of in the back of our head, and it gives it language. It crystallizes it. It says, look at all the things that we have won over time. These are part of the natural order of things. And when you articulate it that way, you increase the guarantee. You know, when you formalize something, you increase the guarantee. So what happens is you have all these Enlightenment thinkers that ought to be familiar to you, by and large, who kind of systematically look at different aspects of society and say, here are the hidden rules that govern this, and if they're rules, it becomes, like I said, a formalized guarantee. We'll talk about the social contract theorists in a little bit. If you remember, Voltaire, one of my favorites, writes Candide. He looks at the idea that both church and a blind kind of following of the Enlightenment are traps, that both teach passivity. That, you know, if I were to fall on the ground right now, you know, and I was a zealot in terms of religion, I might say, well, God put me on the ground, I better stay here. I better just lay on the ground. They clean the carpets, it's not that offensive. If I'm believing in the Enlightenment, I'd say, well, that's part of the natural order of things. Gravity put me here, I ought to stay down here on the ground. Both teach a passivity. Whereas what he believes in is if you know the mechanics or the science or the divine powers that put you down and you understand how things operate, you can use that as a tool. All right? He believes that you shouldn't have this blind optimism, this passivity. You should have a mature optimism. You should understand the world and use it to your advantage. That's the key to happiness. His little phrase was tend your garden. You wouldn't look at a garden and say, well, it's overrun with weeds, I guess I don't eat. You pull the weeds out. You understand that nature kind of puts weeds, it looks to kind of survive and to grow. And your job is to tend your garden, pull the weeds. You wouldn't look at it as like, well, geez, everything's kind of dry and dying. I guess that's what God or nature wanted. You water it, all right? Tangent. At any rate, incredibly kind of important thinker, one of the first, considered kind of partly the father of the Enlightenment, because he's getting us to kind of understand, if you understand these as rules and you use them to your advantage, that's your guarantee to a better order of things, all right? The deists, they help you reconcile faith and science. You don't have to see them as mutually exclusive. I either believe in God or I believe in the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution. God could be the architect behind all of these principles that they're discovering. Like he's the watchmaker that's made the watch, all the inner workings, wound the watch, and then it runs according to its own kind of design, right? Montesquieu, hopefully you remember. Skew, to kind of send off in a different direction. This is the guy that we get a separation of powers from, right? Smith, the capitalist system. Quickly, remembering the three principles that define our capitalist system. Yes? Good. Beccaria, Rights on Crimes and Punishment, is an advocate against the use of judicial torture as an investigatory device. If I torture you, you're going to say anything to make the pain stop. It's not going to get me to truth, it's going to get me to pain threshold. It's a sure way to convict an infirm innocent and acquit robust criminals, if you remember that quote. So all of these guys are looking at different areas. Beccaria looking at due process, judicial guarantees, and they're cementing it to the point where I get giddy. Again, I look at all these steps, and then someone puts it in language that looks like this. Right? This is feudalism. Monkey starts to walk upright. This is parliament. The jaw stops, it's not protruding as much. The forehead isn't as sloped. This is the English Civil War. This is the Glorious Revolution. They're part of the Enlightenment. Is the first one to kind of look at all these events like I just did and say, look, it's part of the natural order of things. That through these events, certain guarantees were won, and that was part of the hidden design all along. It's what we're kind of entitled to. Now again, no Enlightenment thinker is more important to you guys than the social contract theorists. And you did a good job, I think, on the last test of kind of sequencing it through. Where I think we made some mistakes is you all understand that in the state of nature with no higher authority, it is chaotic because everyone is equal. And not only are they equal, they have equal, not only do we have equal claim to things, this is what we missed in part, I don't even have it in the notes here, you have no limits as to how far you go to pursue that claim. Okay? So that was kind of a weakness of really defining why it's so chaotic in the state of nature. You have total equality, which means not only equal claim, but limitless pursuit of that claim. There's nothing I can't do to assert that claim. There's nothing I can't dash to assert that claim, right? So it leads to chaos. And it leads to chaos because, essentially, there's nothing to guarantee safety beyond the proactive use of force. And consequently, it's an awful place that I want to get out of, and I'm willing to give up anything, including the thing that got me in trouble in the first place. Now, second mistake, a lot of us said, I'm willing to give up rights in exchange for protection. It's close, but again, in an AP class, that mistake is important. You're not giving up rights, because rights would imply they're rights. What you're giving up is freedoms. Do you get the distinction? Freedoms are kind of like, I was at liberty to do this. Not that it was my right in the first place, but I was at liberty to do this. So we give up freedoms in exchange for protection. And that makes the distinction when we get to Locke more important. Locke is the one that defines these things not as liberties, that, I was just kind of free to do it, but as rights that are unalienable, that you can't give up. They're inherent, they're part of your code. And I think everyone got it right. The idea is that we're going to limit those rights. We're going to kind of more narrowly define them. I have speech, I just don't have absolute speech. I'm going to more narrowly define it in exchange for protection, okay? Those are incredibly critical for you. Now, one other bump. Deep breath. Tremendous amount of evolutionary kind of progress has brought us now to the colonial experience. And what I want to begin to do is juxtapose the British approach to kind of the colonial expectations. And you're going to see where the two begin to kind of diverge. They begin to clash, all right? When England establishes the colonies in the Americas, they have a number of objectives. There is a political strategic objective. Nation states are kind of like in the state of nature, where they have to do this proactive show of authority to stay safe. The only way to keep kind of France at bay is to continually remind it that England is powerful. So these rival nations compete for colonies. And once you get a colony, you need another colony to kind of protect and preserve that first colony. So there's a strategic side to it. Some of it is social. In some cases, European countries are looking to transplant their civilization. In some cases, they're just looking to get rid of dissidents. England has a lot of religious turmoil. Let them go over. When we talk about people coming to the Americas for religious freedom, there's some inaccuracy to that. There wasn't this universal kind of religious freedom where you could come be whatever you wanted. There was a colony that you could go be Puritan in, and you were free to brutalize Quakers or anybody of a different religion. It wasn't complete religious freedom. There was a colony where I can go practice the religion of my choice and discriminate against others. If I want to be a Quaker, I'll go to Pennsylvania, right? So, there are some social motives, but primarily it's economic. What they're doing is to make money via the system of mercantilism. The colony it's a two-way exchange, remember? The colony is a source of raw materials. They've discovered that this is in Asia. This isn't, there's not teas and silks and all kinds of riches in a bustling marketplace to take advantage of. There is simply raw materials. So I'm going to export those raw materials to the mother country, I'm going to convert them into finished goods, and I'm going to sell them back to a captive marketplace. It's a closed arrangement. The raw materials can only go to the mother country. You can't find a higher buyer. The finished goods can, only go back to the colony. You can't decide, England is selling me the finished goods at a high price, I'm going to see what France will charge. And you can't kind of break out of the arrangement by manufacturing on a large scale those raw materials into finished goods on your own. Now, this is a loose arrangement. It's going to be more formalized by the Navigation and Staple Acts. But through this arrangement, they are making tremendous profit. And both sides are kind of win-winning. England's making a ton of money, and the colonists have all kinds of economic opportunity. People look at mercantilism and colonial life as a raw deal. Well, why would you agree to this limited economic arrangement, where you're shackled? Capitalism suggests that through freedom in the marketplace and competition, you're going to get the best deal. Well, wait a minute. In England, it's a class-driven society where I've got a ceiling on what I can do. It's an island. There's limits in terms of land. I go to the colonies, I've got almost limitless land, a limitless demand for labor. I've got no ceiling on me in terms of class. It's more money-driven as a way to kind of rise within this society. And, little hidden secret, you're not as a slave economically to England as you would think. They are paying taxes at a much greater rate in England than they are in the colonies. The tax rate in England was 3 times higher than it was in the colonies. And this is going to begin to be your kind of, awakening, I think, in that, what are we fighting for in the revolution? Was it, was there truly a violation of rights, or were we fighting for kind of a different sense of things that we're entitled to? We'll come to that. At any rate, this is the primary motive, to make money. More formally, it's known as salutary neglect. if you write a letter and you're old-fashioned, you say greetings and salutations. Anybody still do that? Is there an emoticon for salutations? Salutary means beneficial. So I'm almost creating an oxymoron. Salutary neglect. How do these two terms go together? How can neglect be beneficial? You know, you got in your mind that if you neglect a child or a pet, that's bad. But again, since Brian's close, I'm going to pick on him. Hey, that's really good. You got a pencil. That's fantastic. Did you sharpen that yourself? Look at you sharpening your pencil by yourself. That is fantastic. And he's got two. He brought it back up. I'm going to become a helicopter teacher. And I'm going to hover over Brian and just, you know, hey, did you drink your milk today? I'm going to just kind of, you know, micromanage him by hovering over him until he just, you know, flies into a fit of rage. No one learns anything necessarily if you don't, like, you know, there was this whole movement of like parenting where you saw everything is dangerous, and kids literally started wearing helmets and mouth guards as they would like go up the slide, because potentially they could fall off, and we put wood chips down below. In other words, where I grew up, it was all jagged metal, and you're off on your own. There was no such thing as a tetanus shot. There was this helicopter parenting movement, and then people, you know, pendulum swung, and it's free range. I don't know where my kids are. They're off in the woods somewhere. There's probably a happy medium somewhere. Not all attention is good attention. You often, you know, you learn from your mistakes. Seems like an, you know, strange thing to say, but, you know, mistakes are good. You learn from them. At any rate, that's the logic behind the salutary neglect, is to, you know, hey, let the colonists take on the risk and the expense, and we'll get the benefits. You want to see evidence of this policy, you see it in the charters. Now again, a charter is, like you would ask earlier, is this a constitution? Well, a charter is a little different in that it's more of a thumbnail sketch, I suppose. And these charters in particular are really, you know, thumbnail sketches. In order for you to become a colonist and establish a colony, you needed a written document from the king. And what's in this document? It basically had three things. Here's the land. Here's where you can go. Here is permission to establish a settlement. In other words, here I'm recognizing the authority in charge. Is it a trading company? Is it a proprietary colony where a single individual will be in charge because I owe money? What's the basic structure, the leadership structure of the colony? And then there's permission to pursue trade. That group that's authorized to be there gets essentially a monopoly on trade. They won't have to compete with other rival companies. Okay? That's it. The skeletal nature of it is significant because it gives them tremendous latitude. I'm going to come back to that term in a second. I want you guys to picture the first day of school. I know you don't want to. I don't want to either. And it's rule day. You know, everyone's going to go over the rules. That's what we do on the first day. And there's a teacher that has 3 rules. 3. Be on time. Do your best. And be nice. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. That's everything when you think about it. I've covered everything. Be on time, do your best, and be nice, right? Because my rules are, I think I've done a brilliant job, but because my rules are skeletal, you're going to have a tremendous amount of latitude when it comes to this. So I walk into class after you guys have arrived, and you are in a humongous desk fight. Desks flying all over the place at alarming kind of rates, and just really kind of, you know, deadly kind of, you know, rates as the desk go. And I say, what are you doing? You're violating, you know, my rules. And you say, we were here on time. We got here early to prepare for the desk fight. We are definitely doing our best. I am doing my best to throw this as fast as I can at my classmate's head. And we're being nice because we all agreed to it. We all decided that this would be fun. You know, it's all agreed upon. When you only have 3 rules, you have tremendous latitude to slip between the cracks. So that's what the colonists are doing. They've got England taking this hands-off approach with loosely kind of drawn-up charters, and they're taking all kinds of liberties. You know, now, eventually, if this was AP U.S. history, we'd talk about the distinction about how colonies eventually moved to, you know, royal charters and proprietary kind of charters. And that did happen over time, that a majority of charters began to become revoked because we were taking so much liberties, we were smuggling, we were violating laws, and they began to put aristocrats in the position of governors, which pitted them against local elected assemblies. And that created friction, and that's one of the reasons for the revolution. But for my purposes, all I want you to know is when I look at the very beginning of the colonial period, there's a tremendous amount of latitude, and it allows us to take all kinds of liberties. And that's the significance of the Holy Trio here. The House of Burgesses, the Mayflower Compact, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. You guys have been taught these things time and time again. And it's kind of like mercury, it's like quicksilver. It's something that you can't quite hold in your hand and it goes out your head. People miss the significance of this. And again, my job is to kind of, drill it into your head. What's the significance? These are all firsts. These are all democratic firsts. These are steps towards self-government because we were given the latitude. What's the House of Burgesses? That is a local law-making assembly. We have Parliament. Parliament is making laws, but they're not suiting our local needs. We created a local law-making assembly to make the laws. And once we got away with it, it became senior parking. It became, you have 5 minutes to chill out. It became a God-given, nature-given right that we will curl around in the fetal position screaming, mine, if someone tries to take it away. The Mayflower Compact, again, famous guys with the funny hats. You made them out of construction paper. You would draw, it was Thanksgiving, you did a turkey out of your hand. You did a kind of a hat with a buckle on it, everything had buckles, so you did a cornucopia. Who were the famous guys on the famous boat hitting the famous place? Who are we talking about? We talk about the Mayflower Compact. Pilgrims aboard the Mayflower hit what? They landed on Plymouth Rock, right? We know that the Pilgrims are more than just funny guys with funny hats, right? They're separatists. They're Puritans. They're part of that whole Protestant Revolution. And they've come to establish a colony in part for trade, but for religious purposes. And they're blown off course. That's what the landed on Plymouth Rock suggests. It's unintentional, all right? So they're not where they're supposed to be. They're in violation of the charter. If I wrote you a pass, and the pass was to go to the nurse, but you walked out and you said, you know what, I don't think I want to go to the nurse, I want to go home. I want to go downstairs and make a phone call, and then just kind of get in my car and go. Well, that's not in spirit of the pass I gave you, right? So technically, when you walked out of the room and you changed your mind as to where you needed to go, what should you have done? I'll answer it for you. Turn back around and get another pass, right? They didn't turn around and get another pass. They didn't, land in Plymouth, Massachusetts, which wasn't Massachusetts at the point. They're supposed to be in Virginia. And they're in Massachusetts. They didn't go, well, I better go back and get a different charter. They wrote their own. They self-authorized a charter and created their own kind of, again, the charter says who's in charge, and they said, here's who's in charge, us. We're going to self-authorize a kind of a government. We're going to agree to live by common consent. The rules that we make collectively, we're going to live by. All right? So the significance of this, again, is it's a first. We began to assume the right to establish local government and representative government on our own authority. And once we got away with it, mine. Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, a constitution that formalized local government. And then again, mine. All right? So these are all incredibly important steps because it adds on to the Enlightenment. It's the next kind of step. We're beginning to say we don't just deserve certain principles, we're creating new ones, right? So that is going to run smack dab into a problem when we hit the French and Indian War. And I'm just going to preview this and we'll kind of end it there. We feel entitled to certain things. England is letting us get away with it. And then along comes the French and Indian War, which you guys know connects to the 7 Years' War, hopefully. You know the distinctions. We'll go over that a little bit tomorrow. But ultimately, England wins the French and Indian War, which isn't against the name is a bit of a disclaimer. We're fighting the French colonists, and their Native American allies. And it's really over land here in North America. The French and Indian War is the North American theater of the 7 Years' War. England wins. Kind of. It's more fought to a stalemate, but France gives up a lot. They give up a ton of land. They give up all their North American holdings, parts of India, so on and so forth. How is the victory for England not a victory? Does this come back to you? England wins this war. They get all this new land. How is the victory not a victory? What's the problem with war and winning the war in this case?
Is there a ton of debt?
Debt, right? Puts them in debt. What do they do consequently? What is every kid programmed to tell me is the cause of the revolution?
Higher taxes.
Taxes, they raised taxes. Are taxes the cause of the revolution? If taxes were the cause of revolution, what would 99% of the world be in the middle of right now? Be a flame, right? You just, if you bought something and there's a sales tax, do you immediately burn the store down? Revolution, sales tax, right? Taxes are essential. We know that the tax is the reason we have roads and police and schools. So the problem isn't the taxes. The problem is, and we're going to get into this tomorrow, but I'm going to quiz you on this again tomorrow, how the taxes are arrived at. Who passed the taxes? What body passed these taxes? Parliament, not the House of Burgesses, not common consent. We're seeing ourselves as different. And because we didn't like who passed it, we rebelled. We smuggled, we violated the law, and then they came down on us heavy. And we lost rights to privacy. We lost rights of due process. So what we object to is the who's passing the taxes, how the taxes were arrived at, and how they're being enforced. What we're going to do tomorrow is kind of look at these acts then and say, okay, which is it? Is it a violation of rights, or were the British actually justified in passing this? Okay? But we'll tap out for today at 12. I gave you an extra half hour. How's that?